The throne hall of Zalara shimmered like a cage of light and judgment. Thousands of crystalline eyes turned toward the dais where the queen stood, her form towering in layers of silver carapace that reflected the glow of dying suns beyond the chamber's vaulted dome. Her voice rang out, sharp and absolute, echoing through the bones of every creature present. By decree of the crown and for crimes against blood and command, Princess Kayla of the royal line shall bind her life to that of the human prisoner. No one breathed. Even the drones that filled the balconies paused their mechanical hum. A human, filthy, organic, fragile, was to be bound to the bloodline of the queen herself. It was a punishment disguised as law, an execution draped in ceremony. Kayla stood still, every part of her trained body locked into royal stillness. Yet inside something trembled. Her punishment had been coming for weeks, ever since she'd defied her mother's order to destroy the captured human fleet. She had looked into the transmission feed of those dying humans and seen something she couldn't name. Pity, perhaps, or curiosity. It didn't matter now. The court was watching her fall from grace. Guards dragged the human forward. His wrists were bound by energy coils, his uniform in tatters, his face streaked with dried blood and dust. But his eyes, those human eyes, were clear, steady, impossibly alive. He did not bow. He didn't even look away when the queen's gaze fell upon him like a blade. Commander Elias Ward, the queen intoned, you have spilled Zalar blood. You will now serve as the vessel of our contempt. The royal daughter will claim you as mate, to remind her that mercy breeds weakness. The hall rippled with disgust. Kayla's throat tightened, but she did not protest. To do so would only deepen her disgrace. Still, she could not stop herself from glancing at him. He stood straighter, as though defiance itself were armor. The ceremony began. Light filaments coiled around them both, forming a bond sigil, ancient, binding, irreversible. The sigil pulsed with a cold radiance, etching lines of alien script into their skin. When it touched Elias, he flinched but did not cry out. Kayla felt the burn as well, a sting that reached her core. Through the connection, for just a second, she felt something, heat, emotion, thought that wasn't her own. It was like touching a star barehanded. The hall gasped. The queen's eyes narrowed, sensing the surge of connection. Do not resist, the priest hissed. But Kayla wasn't resisting. The bond had already formed deeper than ritual. Elias spoke for the first time. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but carried a weight that silenced even the drones above. You can chain my body, he said, turning his gaze briefly toward the queen. But not my soul. The words struck like a blow. Zalara's language had no word for soul. The hall erupted in murmurs of outrage. Kayla's pulse quickened. Something about the human's composure made her uneasy. He should have begged. He should have broken. Instead, he stood before an empire of gods and refused to kneel. After the ritual, they were escorted through the palace corridors to the isolation wing, an ornate prison reserved for royal exiles. Guards maintained a distance as though his humanity were contagious. Kayla walked beside him in silence, her claws clicking softly on the polished obsidian floor. The air was heavy with shame and the metallic scent of binding fluid. When the doors sealed behind them, she turned sharply. You should know, she said, her voice clipped, that this is not a union. It is a sentence. Elias met her eyes without flinching. So is life, he replied. But it's still ours to live. She didn't understand the tone. The quiet defiance wrapped in calm acceptance. It was infuriating. For hours she tried to ignore him, sitting by the glass wall that overlooked the storm-choked skies of Zalara. Yet she could feel him, literally feel him, through the residual hum of the bond. His heartbeat, slower than hers but powerful, echoed faintly in her mind. She clenched her hands, trying to sever the connection, but it pulsed stronger with every act of denial. When she turned, he was watching her. Not with lust or fear, but with a kind of sadness. You're angry, he said softly. Good. It means you still care about something. Kayla snapped. Care? You presume too much, human. Yet even as she said it, The word human no longer carried the disgust it once did. She remembered the burning during the ritual, the strange warmth that wasn't pain. That moment had felt alive, dangerous but alive. A thunderclap rolled across the horizon. The palace lights dimmed. Somewhere deep beneath them, the city's energy cores pulsed like a heartbeat. Kayla found herself watching the storm, not because she feared it, but because she wanted to speak. "Why didn't you beg?" she finally asked. Elias tilted his head slightly. "Because I've seen mercy twisted into punishment before. If I give them my fear, they win. If I give you my honesty, maybe we both survive this." She turned away quickly, afraid he might see the flicker of something new in her expression. That night, Kayla could not sleep. The bond hummed softly, syncing their breathing without her consent. She caught glimpses of foreign images. Mountains of green, oceans of blue, laughter that wasn't hers. For the first time in her life, she felt something she couldn't categorize, couldn't control. By morning, rumors had already begun to slither through the palace. The princess had shared the bond willingly. The human had looked into her eyes and lived. The queen heard everything. From her throne chamber, she whispered to her advisors, "Curiosity is the first seed of infection. Watch her closely." In the isolation wing, Kayla stood at the window again, her reflection half lit by alien dawn. Elias was awake, repairing the torn edge of his sleeve with quiet focus. She asked him what he was doing. He smiled faintly. "Mending what's left." She didn't know why that word, mending, tightened something in her chest. Maybe it was the way he said it, as if the act itself meant hope. When she walked closer, the bond pulsed between them again, faint but undeniable. The same warmth spread through her hand, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, "You feel that too, don't you?" Elias looked up slowly, meeting her gaze. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe it's the start of something neither of us understands." For a long, fragile moment, they simply stood there, two enemies bound by law and something far older. Then a sudden chime shattered the quiet, a summons from the throne. The queen demanded her daughter's presence. Kayla's stomach twisted. She looked once more at the human who refused to kneel. He simply nodded. "Go," he said. "But remember, you're more than what they made you." As the guards arrived to escort her away, Kayla realized the strangest thing of all. The human's words echoed louder in her mind than her mother's decree. And though she didn't yet understand why, she found herself wanting to hear them again. The days after the binding felt endless, wrapped in the thick silence of the isolation wing. The guards had orders not to speak unless spoken to, and even they avoided looking at the human directly. Kayla had tried to resume her royal composure, had even practiced the posture her mother had drilled into her since childhood, but it didn't fit anymore. The bond hum that linked her to Elias was a constant reminder that part of her was no longer entirely Zalar. It pulsed faintly beneath her skin, responding whenever he moved, whenever he breathed, whenever he dreamed. She could feel him even now, pacing the far side of the room as if the confinement itself were the insult, not the chains that still circled his wrists. At first, Kayla had decided she would break him. That was what her people expected: control, dominance, distance. He was her punishment, and if she couldn't erase the shame of the union, she could at least prove that the human was beneath her. She watched him from the corner of her eye, waiting for signs of submission, weakness, pleading. But none came. When she ordered him to kneel, his eyes lifted to hers instead, clear, unyielding, unsettlingly calm. "You can chain my body, not my soul," he said again, the same words that had silenced the entire court. Hearing them here in the quiet of the cell hit her differently. There was no defiance in his tone, only truth. Something in her chest twisted sharply. She turned away before he could see it. "You think yourself noble," she hissed, "but you're just a tool of my mother's cruelty." Elias sat down on the stone bench, folding his hands as though her anger were a wind he had long since learned to endure. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I'm still alive. And you?" He looked at her with that strange softness that wasn't pity, You look like someone who hasn't decided if that's a blessing or a curse. Kayla's hands clenched at her sides. You know nothing of me. I know you spared lives, he replied without looking away. That's enough to start a war in your world, isn't it? The words stung because they were true. She had disobeyed her mother to spare human refugees. The act had branded her weak. But Elias spoke it as though it were a strength. That contradiction gnawed at her, day after day. She found herself watching him more than she intended, studying the way he moved, the way he seemed unbroken despite every attempt to humiliate him. Humans were supposed to be unpredictable, chaotic, emotional. Yet Elias's quiet steadiness unnerved her far more than any outburst could. At night, when the palace lights dimmed, Kayla would stand by the observation window and let her thoughts slip through the bond. Sometimes she could feel his memories brush against hers. Flashes of a blue sky, the laughter of men in flight suits, the hum of a human starship before battle. They came uninvited, like ghosts of another life. One night she caught herself tracing the outline of her palm, remembering the warmth she'd felt when his hand had brushed hers during the storm of the ceremony. That single moment had changed something she didn't want to name. She tried to reassert control. The next morning she summoned the guards, ordering that the human perform menial tasks in her presence. Moving heavy equipment, cleaning weapons, simple labor designed to remind him of his place. But every command backfired. He did everything she asked, wordlessly and efficiently, never showing resentment, never lowering his gaze. The effect was maddening. Do you take pride in this? She demanded as he finished repairing one of the damaged drones. He wiped his hands on his sleeve and looked at her with those quiet, impossible eyes. I take pride in what I can still do, he said. That's how we stay human. The word we caught her off guard. It felt like an invitation she didn't know how to refuse. Later that day, her mother's emissary arrived. A cold, glass-skinned envoy who spoke with the queen's authority. The queen requests an update on your progress, princess, the envoy said. Has the human been subdued? Kayla's mouth opened before she could think. He obeys, she said carefully, but not in spirit. The envoy's crystal eyes blinked slowly. Then he remains dangerous. The queen advises termination if control cannot be maintained. Elias didn't react to the threat. He just kept working on the drone, his fingers steady. When the envoy departed, Kayla stood silently in the doorway, watching him. You heard, she said. I did. And you don't care? He looked up, expression unreadable. Caring changes nothing. Doing does. That night, Kayla dreamed of fire, of the human world burning beneath Zalar ships, of screams and smoke and a young man standing alone on a shattered bridge refusing to surrender. She woke with a start, breath ragged. Across the room, Elias stirred, as though her fear had pulled him from sleep. The bond shimmered faintly, light tracing the invisible connection between them. Are you afraid of me? She asked suddenly, her voice low in the dark. Elias's answer came after a moment. No, but I think you're afraid of yourself. The words struck deeper than she expected. For hours she lay awake, unable to escape the echo of them. By morning, something inside her had shifted. When she brought him water, she didn't toss it toward him as before. She handed it to him carefully, and when their fingers brushed, the bond pulsed once. Slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat they shared. Over the next days, her curiosity grew into something dangerous. She began to study him in secret, asking the palace AI for access to his species records, reading about human history, human wars, human art. The more she learned, the more contradictions she found, creatures capable of cruelty beyond measure, yet also of sacrifice and kindness that defied reason. She watched recordings of their laughter, their mourning, their endless drive to survive. And slowly, the disgust she'd been taught to feel began to unravel. On the fifth night, she caught Elias staring through the glass wall at the storm-churned horizon. What are you looking at? She asked. He smiled faintly. Your world, he said, trying to understand how it breathes. It doesn't breathe, she said automatically. It consumes. He turned his head toward her. Then maybe it's time someone taught it how. The air between them tightened, heavy with something unspoken. Kayla's pulse thrummed in her throat. She wanted to deny the meaning in his words, but couldn't. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a princess or a prisoner. She just felt seen. When she left the chamber that night, she didn't realize the surveillance drones were already tracking her every glance toward him. By dawn, the Queen's watchers had sent a report. The princess observes the human too closely. The infection deepens. Kayla didn't yet know her mother was preparing a new test, one that would break either the human's will or her own. But deep inside, as she looked once more into those defiant eyes, she knew something irreversible had begun. The Queen's summons came at dawn, when the pale stormlight of Zalara poured through the spires of the citadel like cold fire. Kayla felt the weight of it before she even entered the throne hall. The doors hissed open, revealing her mother seated upon the obsidian dais, the throne behind her pulsing faintly with the living circuitry of the hive network. Thousands of neural strands connected her to the empire itself. Every soldier, every ship, every citizen. The Queen did not simply rule Zalara. She was Zalara. Kayla knelt, though the gesture felt hollow now. The bond with Elias pulsed faintly at the base of her spine, a quiet heartbeat that refused to be silenced. The Queen's gaze settled on her like the edge of a blade. "My daughter," she said softly, though her voice carried through the hall like thunder. "I have received troubling reports." Kayla kept her eyes lowered. "Reports, mother?" "The human," the Queen said, her tone sharpening. "You have allowed it too much freedom. You have spoken to it." Kayla swallowed hard. "It obeys as ordered." The Queen rose from her throne. The air crackled with her presence. "You misunderstand the nature of infection. It begins not with disobedience, but with curiosity. You think you are observing the creature, but already it changes you. Their emotions are parasites, soft things that feed on reason." Kayla hesitated, then asked quietly, "And yet, mother, why do we keep them alive at all?" The Queen descended the steps slowly, her movements fluid and predatory. "Because a disease must be studied before it is eradicated." She stopped inches from Kayla, her carapace gleaming in the dim light. "Do not forget what you are. Emotion is chaos. It is weakness. It is human." The words struck deep, but the faint hum beneath Kayla's skin rebelled against them. The Queen noticed her daughter's silence and leaned closer. "Tell me, Kayla, do you feel anything when the human looks at you?" Kayla's mouth went dry. "No, mother." The Queen's eyes narrowed, searching her face. Then, without another word, she turned away. "We shall see." When Kayla returned to the isolation wing, her chest still ached with the echo of her mother's voice. Elias was waiting, unshackled now under temporary guard orders, repairing a broken filtration unit. He looked up as she entered. "You've been gone," he said. "I was starting to think they'd decided to finish the punishment without you." She didn't respond. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the faint hum of the machine. Finally she said, "My mother believes emotions are a disease." Elias didn't laugh, though a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe she's right," he said. "They can spread fast. Hard to control once they take hold." Kayla turned sharply. "You mock me." He shook his head. "No, I just think she doesn't understand the cure." "What cure?" He set down the tool and looked at her, really looked, those same steady eyes that refused to bow. "Understanding," he said simply. "It's the one thing your kind fears most." Before she could respond, the alarm shrieked through the corridors. A red haze filled the isolation chamber as guards rushed past the doors. Kayla followed, instincts overriding confusion. "What's happening?" she demanded. A soldier stopped long enough to answer. "Intruder in the lower decks. A child escaped from the hive nursery. Containment breach imminent." Kayla's breath caught. Hive children were rarely allowed near the palace. Too unstable, too easily affected by stray emotions. If one had escaped, the guards would kill it on sight. She sprinted after them before she even realized she was moving. The corridors twisted downward, the metallic scent of energy weapons thick in the air. They found the child cornered near a power conduit. A small Zalar girl, barely stabilized, trembling in fear. The guards raised their plasma spears. Kayla shouted, "Stop! She's not a threat." But the commander didn't hesitate. "By law, princess, all unstable brood must be purged." The spear ignited. The girl screamed, and then Elias moved. He had followed unnoticed, still half in chains. Before anyone could react, he threw himself between the guard and the child, the plasma bolt searing across his shoulder instead of the girl's heart. The energy flare lit the corridor in blinding light. He fell hard, gritting his teeth, the smell of scorched fabric filling the air. For a moment, everything froze. Kayla's pulse thundered in her ears. The guards shouted, moving to subdue him, but she stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel. "Touch him, and I will strip your ranks." They hesitated, confused, staring at her. She knelt beside Elias, pressing her palm against the wound. The bond flared white-hot, alive. She felt his pain as if it were her own, a raw surge of humanity that sent tears stinging her eyes. Tears. She hadn't cried since childhood. Elias looked up, breathing hard. "Guess. I failed the obedience test." She shook her head, voice trembling. Why would you protect one of us?" "Because she's a child," he murmured. "Because someone had to." The simplicity of his answer shattered something in her. Around them, the guards waited for orders. Kayla rose slowly, her hands slick with his blood. "Take the child back to containment," she said. "No harm is to come to her." The commander hesitated but obeyed. When they were alone, Kayla turned back to Elias. "You'll be punished for this," she said. He gave a weak smile. "Wouldn't be the first time." Her mind spun with questions, emotions colliding in ways that made no sense. She helped him back to the chamber herself, ordering medical drones to treat him immediately. The bond pulsed stronger than ever, threads of light flickering between their skin as the nanites closed his wound. When his breathing steadied, she found herself sitting beside him, her hands still trembling. "My mother warned me that emotions are a disease," she whispered. "But if that's true, then why does it feel like healing?" Elias's eyes opened slowly, still pale from pain. "Because maybe," he said, "you're starting to remember you're alive." Kayla stared at him, her heart pounding in rhythms that weren't entirely her own. For the first time, she couldn't tell where the bond ended and she began. Outside, in the cold corridors of the Citadel, hidden eyes watched through security feeds. The Queen stood before the flickering images, her face unreadable. "So," she murmured, voice low and dangerous, "the infection spreads faster than I thought." In the isolation wing, Kayla brushed a strand of silver hair from her face and looked at Elias again. The faintest, most forbidden thought crossed her mind. What if this is not infection at all, but evolution? The solar storm began as a whisper, a faint electric hum that rippled through the alien sky. By the time Kayla realized what it was, the horizon had already turned to glass. Brilliant streaks of plasma arced across the distant towers of the capital, bathing the world in eerie violet light. The Queen's guards shouted for everyone to return to their quarters, but Kayla was far from home. Inspecting a ruined mining outpost on the borderlands, a punishment mission meant to remind her of her place. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Queen called it duty. Kayla knew it was exile with royal framing. Elias was there too, a prisoner assigned to her as escort. No one dared question why a princess would travel with a human convict. To most of her people, he was little more than a living warning, proof that humans were defiant creatures best kept under watch. Yet Kayla had seen something else in him during their long silence-filled days. He didn't flinch when spoken to. He didn't tremble when threatened. He only watched, quiet as the wind before a storm, as though measuring every breath of her world. When the first explosion hit, they were inspecting the reactor ruins. The ground buckled under them, dust and sparks filling the air. Kayla stumbled, catching herself against a cracked console as Elias shouted her name. Not her title, her name. That alone would have earned him execution if heard. She turned sharply, ready to remind him of it, but the ceiling gave way before she could speak. Elias moved faster than any royal guard she'd ever seen. His arm locked around her waist, dragging her through falling debris. They crashed behind a fragment of metal plating as the outpost began to collapse. A shockwave followed, glass, wind, and plasma curling together like living fire. The outside world screamed in light. They found a half-buried shelter beneath the old reactor, an emergency bunker sealed decades ago. The hatch screeched as Elias forced it open, and the smell of rust and old air hit them like a wall. Inside, darkness pressed close, lit only by the pulsing flashes from outside. When the storm sealed the exit behind them with molten sand, Kayla realized they were trapped. For the first time in her life, Princess Kayla felt something her people had forgotten how to name. Not fear of pain, not fear of death, fear of helplessness. Elias dropped to one knee, inspecting the old power node in the corner. "It still works," he muttered. His voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "Air filters might hold for a few hours." Kayla's throat tightened. "A few hours?" He glanced up at her, those human eyes steady even as dust settled on his face. "Unless you've got royal tricks you're hiding, Your Highness, yes. A few hours." Her instinct was to snap at him to reassert control. But her tongue felt heavy, her pulse too fast. The air already smelled stale, metallic. She sat down, pulling her knees close. The silence between them thickened. Only the faint hum of the power core broke it. After a long while, Elias spoke again. "You've never been in one of these before, have you?" Kayla didn't answer. He smiled faintly, as if that was answer enough. "They built them when the first storms hit," he continued. "The radiation spikes could cook a man alive. But this alloy," he rapped his knuckles against the wall, "it holds. Humans designed it back before. Before we enslaved you," Kayla finished for him, her voice brittle. He didn't deny it. "Before you thought we stopped being human." She turned to look at him, anger flaring as much at herself as him. "You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy?" The words caught. What did she enjoy? Being her mother's pawn? Pretending that binding herself to a human was justice? The air between them was suffocating. And yet, Elias's calm anchored it somehow. He lowered himself to the floor across from her, leaning back against the wall. "No," he said quietly. "I think you don't know what you want. Not yet." Her chest tightened. No one spoke to her like that. She should have struck him. Should have reminded him of the shock collar linked to her command code. But all she could do was stare at the dust in his hair and the cut on his cheek, where a shard had grazed him during the collapse. Minutes bled into hours. The storm above roared like an angry god. The lights flickered, and in one moment of flicker dark, Kayla felt the world tilt, her composure crumbling with the weight of trapped air. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath, but panic clawed its way up. "I can't breathe." Elias was beside her in an instant. "Hey, look at me." His hands hovered near her shoulders but didn't touch. Deep breath. In. Slowly, her vision blurred. She hated that her body betrayed her like this. Trembling, gasping, weak, and yet his voice cut through it all. Steady, warm, grounded. Then it happened, that first impossible touch. His fingers brushed her wrist, just for a heartbeat. The contact was electric, burning through every layer of pride she'd ever built. His skin was warmer than hers, alive in a way alien flesh wasn't meant to feel. Kayla froze, her body caught between pulling away and leaning closer. Elias withdrew immediately, lowering his hand. "Sorry," he murmured. "Old habit." She should have scolded him, should have called him insolent. Instead, she whispered, "Do it again." The words surprised even her. He looked at her, searching her face for mockery, for command, found neither. Then slowly he reached out once more. His fingertips met hers, gentle, deliberate. The static of the storm seemed to fade in that instant. Kayla's breath shuddered. "Why are you not afraid of me?" He smiled faintly. "Because fear means you've already lost." Something deep inside her cracked open at that. For years she'd watched humans bend, kneel, break under her kind's rule. But this one stood taller in chains than most aliens did in crowns. When the power flickered again, Kayla didn't move away. She felt his pulse beneath his skin, steady, human, alive. And for the first time, she wondered if that warmth was what her people had been trying to erase all along. Hours later, when the storm quieted, they sat in silence, still side by side. The filters hummed weakly. The hatch above remained sealed in glass sand. Kayla stared at the dim emergency light, knowing that when rescue came, everything would change. Someone would have seen the collapse. Someone would have seen them together. She turned to him once more. "When they find us," she said softly, "they'll say you touched royalty. They'll kill you for it." Elias met her gaze without flinching. "Then let me die human." The light died completely, leaving them in darkness. And in that darkness, the air between them burned brighter than any storm outside. The storm passed, but it didn't leave peace behind, only whispers. 3 nights after the outpost collapse, Princess Kayla returned to the capital beneath the shadow of 2 suns. The royal halls shimmered with crystal light, and the air itself seemed to hum with accusation. Servants stared too long. Officers paused mid-sentence when she passed. Even the courtiers who once feared her now watched her as though she were diseased. The rumors had begun. They called it the human infection, an invisible sickness that spread through empathy. The Queen's scholars had named it centuries ago, back when the first humans had been conquered. To care for them, to see them as equals, was to let your mind corrode. Kayla had grown up hearing the stories, mocking the weakness of those who fell. But now, walking the glittering corridors with her mother's eyes everywhere, she felt every word as a knife pressed beneath her ribs. She hadn't told anyone what had happened in that bunker. Not about the panic, not about the touch, not about the silence afterward where her heart refused to obey her mind. But something in her had changed. The mirror showed it before she could hide it. Her expression was softer, her tone uncertain, and uncertainty in the royal bloodline was treason. Her mother, the Queen of Zela, noticed immediately. "You've been quiet," the Queen said that evening as they dined alone in the Tower of Suns. Her voice was cool, measured, the kind of tone that meant danger disguised as curiosity. "Tell me, Kayla, what does the human smell like after fear?" Kayla froze. The question cut through her composure like a blade. She hadn't mentioned Elias's name. The Queen didn't need her to. "I wouldn't know," Kayla answered finally, forcing her voice flat. The Queen smiled, the kind of smile predators wear before they strike. "You wouldn't? Strange. The outpost recordings suggest otherwise." Kayla's heart skipped. Outpost recordings. The surveillance network. She'd forgotten that even in ruins, Zalar eyes saw everything. But before panic could show, Kayla forced a faint laugh. "Perhaps your spies confuse exhaustion for emotion." Her mother tilted her head, golden eyes narrowing. "Exhaustion doesn't make a princess hold a slave's hand." Kayla went still. The Queen's words were soft, but the silence that followed was suffocating. She wanted to deny it, to shout, to defend herself, but the memory of Elias's fingers brushing hers burned too vividly to erase. The Queen finally leaned back. "You will remember who you are," she said, her voice colder than the glass towers outside. "You carry my blood. If I see one more sign of weakness, I'll remind you what happens to those who forget." When Kayla bowed, she didn't breathe until she was alone again. But that night, her chambers were not empty. A shadow moved in the corner, the flicker of a Zalar spy unit, its sensors glinting faintly blue. Kayla recognized the mark etched into its plating. A drone belonging to the Queen's own intelligence branch. It wasn't supposed to be there. It was watching her. And in that moment, she knew her mother didn't just suspect. She knew. Panic became clarity. Kayla crossed to her terminal and activated a false transmission loop, one she'd learned from the human archives she'd secretly studied. It replayed harmless data to fool the spy sensors, a trick punishable by death if discovered. But she didn't stop there. She opened the communications grid and traced the last transmission signal from the outpost. The data trail led to the central detainment sector, where Elias had been reassigned. The Queen hadn't executed him yet. She wanted to watch. Kayla stared at the code flickering across the console. Every part of her screamed to stop, to obey, to let him fade into the system and survive by silence. But his words, that quiet defiance in the dark, echoed through her mind. Because someone has to. So she began her first act of rebellion. At midnight, Kayla slipped into the archive's wing. She wore no crown, no insignia, just a cloak dark enough to blur her outline from the scanners. The guards didn't question her. No one would dare. But she moved like someone walking on the edge of a blade. The chamber of records was cold, lit by the low hum of suspended data threads. Each thread represented a prisoner file. It took her less than 5 minutes to find Elias's. Designation: Human Specimen 3 to 17. Sentence: lifelong servitude under royal custody. Current status: isolation. Behavioral anomaly: emotional influence. That final line made her stomach turn. Emotional influence. That's what they called it when a human made a Zalar feel. Kayla didn't realize someone else was in the room until the air shifted. "Strange place for a princess," said a voice behind her. Deep, accented, and familiar. Commander Relin, head of the Queen's Security Corps. Her mentor since childhood. And her mother's most loyal blade. Kayla didn't turn. "I couldn't sleep." He stepped closer. "And that's enough reason to trespass in the archives?" Her pulse quickened. "You accuse me of treason, Commander?" "I accuse no one," he said, though his tone was too sharp to believe. "But the Queen believes the human has infected you. She sent me to confirm it." Kayla finally turned. "And what did you see, Relin?" He studied her for a long, quiet moment. His expression was unreadable. Then he sighed. "You've always been more like your father than your mother." That was both mercy and warning. She knew what it meant. He wasn't going to arrest her yet, but the Queen would demand proof. Proof could mean Elias's blood. When he left, Kayla's hands were shaking. She knew what she had to do. She erased the archive entry. Every record of Elias's designation. Every mark of his existence in the royal system. When the data thread vanished, so did his trace in the Queen's dominion. It was her first betrayal. Not of duty, but of her mother. The next morning, the Queen's chamber vibrated with fury. "Someone has tampered with my records," she hissed to her council. "Find them." Kayla stood among the advisors, silent, her heart a hammer of guilt and exhilaration. She should have been terrified, but instead, she felt alive. That night, she went to the lower levels, following the secret route through the service tunnels. She found Elias behind a containment shield, pale light cutting across his face. He looked up, surprised, when she appeared. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly. "I just erased your name from existence," she replied. "So maybe I should be." He smiled faintly, that same unshakable calm that had drawn her in from the start. "Then I owe you my life." Kayla shook her head. "No, you owe me nothing." She paused, voice trembling. "But you must help me do what I can't do alone." Elias studied her carefully. "And what's that?" Kayla met his gaze. "Teach me what it means to be human." For a long time, neither of them moved. The silence between them hummed with something greater than fear, the seed of something the Queen had tried to purge from her bloodline for generations. But neither of them noticed the faint red light blinking above the cell door. The Zalar spy drone had followed her through the tunnel. It watched, recorded, and transmitted everything. And far above them, in the throne tower of Zala, the Queen smiled as the footage streamed in. "So," she whispered, "the infection has bloomed." The capital of Zala had never been so silent. The air itself felt sharp, heavy, expectant, as if the world held its breath, waiting for blood. At the center of the grand arena, the Queen stood upon her obsidian throne, her voice amplified through psychic channels that reached every corner of the empire. "Today," she declared, "we witness the cleansing of corruption from royal blood." The audience, Thousands of Zalari nobles, officers, and civilians cheered like a storm. Their chants of purity, purity, rolled through the crystalline tears. Kayla stood below the dais, bound in the silver coils of tradition, not physically restrained, but caged by expectation. Her ceremonial armor glittered with royal insignia, yet it felt like a shroud. She hadn't slept since the Queen's summons. The spy drone's footage had been displayed before the council. Her standing beside a human, touching his hand, speaking of forbidden things. The sentence was clear even before it was spoken. Across the arena, Elias was dragged into the light. His wrists were bound, his face bruised but unbroken. Even in chains, he walked upright, every step a quiet rebellion. The murmurs in the crowd swelled, disgust from her kind, fascination from the younger ones who had only heard legends of human defiance. Kayla's gaze locked on his, and something unspoken passed between them. The memory of the shelter, his warmth, his calm, his refusal to break, cut through the noise like a heartbeat. The Queen's eyes, golden and cold as dying stars, turned to her daughter. "Princess Kayla of the Zalar bloodline," she intoned. "You stand accused of consorting with a lesser being, of concealing a human from royal punishment, and of treasonous disobedience to your queen and mother. How do you plead?" Kayla's throat felt dry. Every word she had ever spoken as royalty, every lie, every order, every command, hung in that silence. "I plead," she began, her voice trembling, "that he is not what you think." Gasps rippled through the court. The Queen's expression didn't change. "You deny the infection?" "I deny that empathy is weakness," Kayla said, louder now. "You call it disease. I call it what we lost when we killed our humanity." The Queen rose from her throne, her cloak unfurling like wings. "Enough!" The single word shook the arena. "Your weakness has already poisoned this court. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who forget their blood." She raised her hand. The guards forced Elias to his knees at the center of the dais, right below the execution platform. A ceremonial blade of psionic energy flared to life in the Queen's grasp, humming with lethal beauty. Kayla's chest constricted. This was it. Her mother's vengeance. Swift, perfect, unquestioned. Elias looked up at her through the chaos. He didn't beg, didn't speak, just held her gaze, calm and steady as the day she'd met him. That calm undid her. When the Queen stepped forward to strike, Kayla moved. "No!" The shout echoed through the arena like thunder. She leaped between them, her arm outstretched, and the blade froze inches from Elias's throat. The psychic field rippled, sparks of violet energy tearing through the air. "Stand down," her mother roared. Kayla's heart pounded, but her voice was clear. "You can't kill him." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "You dare defy your queen? I invoke the right of bond." The words hit the arena like a detonation. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, the silence shattered into chaos. The right of bond, an ancient Zalar law older than the monarchy itself, rarely spoken of and almost never used. It granted a royal the power to claim any being under their life protection, declaring them bonded mates. To harm one was to harm the other. To kill one was to curse both. It had been forgotten for centuries, buried in myth. Until now. The Queen's face hardened, her psychic aura darkening the very sky above the arena. "You dare twist sacred law to protect an animal?" Kayla didn't back down. "I dare to remind you that law binds even the crown." She turned toward the crowd, her voice carrying through the psychic channels her mother once controlled. "You call him lesser. Yet when the storm took me, none of you came for me. He did. He saved me, when no Zalar would risk their life for mine." The murmurs grew, doubt blooming like cracks in glass. The Queen's energy pulsed violently. "End this madness!" she screamed at the guards. But the guards hesitated. Even they knew the old laws. To disobey a royal right was to curse their bloodlines. Kayla dropped to one knee beside Elias, her hand brushing the back of his neck. "If you kill him," she said quietly, "you kill me." The Queen's control faltered for the first time in decades. You would doom yourself for a human? Kayla met her eyes. No. I would save myself from becoming like you. Gasps tore through the audience. Some shouted in horror, others in awe. The world had turned on its axis, and no one knew where it would land. Elias's chains flickered with the Queen's fury. She tried to override the bond, but ancient law rooted itself deeper than command codes or psionic control. The air filled with the scent of burning ozone as energy flared between Kayla and Elias, sealing the claim. The ritual was alive again, the universe itself recognizing their union. The Queen screamed, psychic power bursting from her crown in a storm of light. Then you are no daughter of mine. Kayla stood, trembling but unyielding. Then I am something better. The shock wave from her mother's fury hit her like a hammer, throwing her backward. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, his hands steady, eyes locked on the Queen. You'll regret this, the Queen hissed, her voice echoing across dimensions. You've doomed us all. Kayla looked at her mother through the haze of smoke and shattered crystal. Maybe doom is what we deserve, if it means we finally feel again. Then, in a single flash of light, she and Elias vanished. The ancient bond had activated, teleporting them beyond the reach of royal law, to somewhere the Queen's command couldn't touch. For the first time in recorded Xalar history, the entire galaxy watched a royal princess choose a human over her empire. Every system, every world, every colony, the transmission had been live, broadcast to billions. Within hours, riots broke out. On human slave worlds, hope sparked like wildfire. On Xalar strongholds, rebellion stirred. And in the quiet corners of space, where whispers of freedom still dared to survive, one phrase began to spread. A legend being born in real time. The princess chose humanity. But far above the chaos, in the ruined throne chamber, the Queen sat alone, her eyes burning with vengeance and grief. Let the galaxy burn, she whispered. If she's chosen the human heart, then I'll show her how easily it breaks. The Queen's voice echoed through the burning halls of the citadel like thunder made of grief. Her daughter's name was now a curse. Across the stars, the proclamation spread. Princess Kayla of the Xalar Empire was exiled, branded a traitor, and sentenced to death alongside her human mate. Ships were already en route to hunt them down, and every world loyal to the Queen now bore a single command. Capture them alive, so the Queen herself could watch their final breaths. Kayla and Elias moved through the ruins of an abandoned mining colony on the moon of Serrath, the air sharp with metallic dust. Kayla's armor was cracked and scorched. Elias's hands were torn from days of running and fighting without rest. Yet through the exhaustion, there was something unspoken binding them. A fragile thread of trust that had somehow survived the war now chasing them. They hid in a collapsed structure, the only light coming from the flicker of a dying power core. Kayla pressed a hand to her temple, her body trembling from psychic feedback. Her mother's rage burned in her mind like acid. She's connected to me still, she said through clenched teeth. Every breath I take, she feels it. Every thought, she hears its echo. Elias knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her face. Then we'll make her feel your strength too, he murmured. Not her fear. She looked at him, eyes gleaming with alien luminescence. You don't understand. She made me what I am. Her voice isn't just in my mind. It's in my blood. Then maybe it's time to rewrite your blood, Elias said quietly. You taught me once that the Xalar can reshape their DNA with will alone. What if you used that to change what she made you into? Kayla stared at him in disbelief. That's forbidden. Even suggesting it would have been treason before. She trailed off, realizing the absurdity of that thought. Everything was treason now. You think I can change what I am? I think you already have, Elias said. You're not the Queen's daughter anymore. You're you. His words struck something deep, something that made her chest tighten painfully. She wanted to laugh, to deny it, but she couldn't, because deep down she wanted to believe him. That night, as they huddled together for warmth in the hollow of the ruin, Kayla's memories drifted, back to the first time she'd seen her mother cry. She'd been just a child then, hiding behind a pillar in the royal sanctum. The queen had been alone, kneeling before a hologram of a burning city. A city the humans had destroyed during the First War. "They'll never love us," her mother had whispered. "So we must make them fear us." That had been the creed Kayla was raised on. Fear before love. Power before mercy. But Elias had undone it all with a single look. The same defiant human look that now haunted her dreams. When dawn came, a sound ripped through the horizon. The piercing whine of plasma engines. Zalar interceptors. Kayla's instincts kicked in instantly. "They've found us," she hissed, grabbing her pulse rifle. Elias stood, scanning the gray sky. "How many?" "Too many." She activated her wrist module, pulling up a holographic map. "We can't outrun them. There's an old transport hangar a few clicks east, but it's on open ground." Elias smiled grimly. "Then we make open ground our ally." As the first interceptor descended, he sprinted toward the hangar, drawing fire to himself. Kayla's heart lurched. He moved with reckless precision, human muscles fueled by something that looked like faith. She fired back, her shots slicing through the smog. Explosions bloomed around them, raining molten debris. When they reached the hangar, Elias was bleeding from his shoulder, but still standing. Kayla sealed the door behind them and collapsed beside him, her hands shaking. "You could have died," she snapped. "I almost did," he said with a small grin. "Guess I'm still learning your people's dance." She wanted to be angry, but instead, she laughed. A hollow, trembling laugh that turned into a sob. "You're insane." "Maybe," he said softly, "but I'd rather die insane next to you than sane without you." Her breath caught. The words hit her like a physical force, and before she could think, she leaned in, their foreheads touching, the faint hum of her bioluminescence painting his skin in soft blue light. But before their lips could meet, the floor shuddered violently. A beam of red light tore through the hangar ceiling. Kayla looked up and froze. A massive ship hovered above, black as void, its insignia unmistakable, the royal crest of the Zalar Empire. And stepping out of the descending transport was her mother, the queen herself. Her eyes burned brighter than plasma. "You've shamed me long enough, daughter." The queen's voice boomed through the comms. "Now you'll watch as your human dies, and then you'll beg me to end you." Kayla's hand found Elias's. A desperate, wordless promise. Elias whispered back, "Then she's about to find out what it means when a human refuses to die." The hangar doors blew open, and light swallowed them both. The galaxy burned with the sound of defiance. Broadcasts spread like wildfire. Images of the princess who defied her queen, standing beside the human she was meant to despise. "She chose love over lineage," the transmission said, echoing through the void. "And for that, she is hunted by her own blood." To some, Kayla was a traitor. To others, a symbol. But to Elias, she was just the woman whose trembling hand had once reached for his in the dark and never let go. They escaped the queen's wrath by slipping through the wreckage fields of the old war, thousands of shattered ships drifting like tombstones between stars. Rebel frequencies whispered to them from the shadows. Alien defectors, tired of the queen's tyranny, now sought the fugitives out, asking for orders Kayla had no right to give. "We don't command anyone," she said bitterly to one group of Zalar pilots who knelt before her in an asteroid base. "You think we're saviors? We're just running." The lead pilot looked up, his voice trembling through the translator. "Running or not, princess, you gave us something the queen never could, hope." Elias stepped forward, his human eyes cutting through the gloom. "Then stop kneeling. Hope doesn't bow." That became the spark. The first of the rebel fleets swore allegiance, not to a throne but to an idea. Humans, Zalar, and outcasts of a dozen races began gathering under a new banner. Two intertwined hands, one human, one alien, set against a rising star. Kayla watched the symbol spread across ships and armor, and for the first time, she began to understand the power of what they'd started. But the queen was not idle. From her throne on the world of glass and shadow, she unleashed her death ships, vessels built from living Zalar flesh and machine mind, piloted by soldiers born without fear or mercy. The rebellion's first victory was also its bloodiest. The death ships tore through colonies and resistance strongholds like fire through paper. Every time a world rose to join Kayla, the Queen's armada burned 3 more in response. Elias grew quieter with every loss. He spent long hours in the cockpit, staring at tactical maps and casualty counts. One night, Kayla found him there, his knuckles white against the control board. "You should sleep," she said softly. "I can't," he whispered. "They're dying because of us." Kayla's heart ached. "No, they're dying because they finally believe in something worth dying for." He turned to her, eyes filled with that same unbreakable fire she'd seen since the beginning. "You sound like a leader." "I sound like someone pretending to be one," she murmured. "You think I don't hear her voice every time another ship falls? You think I don't feel the blood of my people screaming through the link?" At that, Elias frowned. "The link." She hesitated. "I never told you. My mother, she forged a bond between us before I was born. It was her way of controlling me. Even across galaxies, I can feel her pulse in mine. When she's angry, I burn. When she suffers, She winced, clutching her chest. "I feel it too." Elias caught her as she stumbled. "Kayla, it's getting worse," she gasped. "She's dying." The words hung in the air like static. Elias froze. "What did you say?" Kayla's breathing steadied, her voice trembling with revelation. "The Queen. She's been dying for years. That's why she did all this, the marriage, the exile. It wasn't punishment. It was a test." "A test for what?" Kayla's eyes glistened, her voice breaking. "For my heart. She wanted to see if love could make me weak, or strong enough to lead after she's gone." Elias shook his head in disbelief. "You're saying she did this on purpose? She condemned you, tried to kill me, slaughtered entire worlds, just to test you." "She's Zaylar," Kayla said bitterly. "Love to her was always a weapon." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the ship's engines. Then Elias said softly, "Then maybe it's time we show her what real love can do." Within days, the rebellion transformed. Elias's words became a rallying cry. "Love is not weakness, it's rebellion." Broadcasts of Kayla standing beside him, bloodied, exhausted but unbroken, spread through the networks faster than the Queen's sensors could silence them. Whole fleets began defecting, captains turning their guns on their former masters. Even some of the death ships hesitated mid-battle, their pilots faltering as they heard the forbidden name, Kayla of the New Dawn. The Queen, dying and furious, unleashed her final weapon, a psychic storm that reached across light years. Kayla dropped to her knees as the echo hit her, blood trickling from her nose. "She's calling me home," she whispered. "She wants me to return." Elias grabbed her shoulders. "Then we go together." "No," she said weakly, shaking her head. "If I go, she'll kill you. If you go alone, she'll destroy you." His voice hardened. "We started this together. We end it together." Kayla's gaze softened, tears streaking her face. "You humans never learn when to surrender." Elias smiled faintly. "That's what makes us human." And as their ship turned toward the Queen's dying world, the rebellion followed, an armada of light and fire streaking through the void. Every soul in the galaxy watched, holding its breath. The daughter was coming home, but whether she came as savior or executioner, no one yet knew. The Queen's palace loomed in silence, a cathedral of glass and bone floating above the dying world. Lightning rippled across its surface like veins of light inside a dying heart. Every corridor echoed with the sound of distant thunder and the whisper of things that once called her daughter. Kayla stepped through the gates of the throne hall with her armor cracked and her pulse a living drum in her skull. Behind her, Elias walked quietly, every footstep heavy with the weight of billions watching from across the stars. The great hall was filled with Zaylar nobles, silent and trembling. The Queen sat upon her throne, the crown of neural filaments coiling through her silver hair like living metal. Her eyes, black mirrors that reflected every soul they touched, lifted slowly to her daughter. "You returned," she said, her voice both proud and venomous. Kayla bowed her head slightly. You called. I came. The queen smiled faintly. And brought your infection with you. Her gaze flicked to Elias, studying him like a weapon she'd forged herself. The human. The weakness that turned my bloodline into myth. Elias stood firm. If love is weakness, then maybe that's what your empire needed. The hall gasped. Kayla's pulse jumped. No one had ever spoken to the queen like that. But her mother only laughed. A hollow, weary sound that filled the endless space. You misunderstand me, human. I did not summon you to kill you. I summoned you to test her one final time. Kayla took a step forward. Mother, it's over. The fleets have joined us. The people want peace. Let it end. Peace. The queen's tone cracked like a whip. You speak of peace while my world rots under your rebellion? You've already ended the empire, daughter. But before you finish the work, I will give you a choice. The throne shifted. From the dais rose two pillars of light. In one, a holographic image of Elias appeared. Alive, real, every breath flickering in sync with his own. In the other, Kayla saw the Zalar homeworld cities burning, billions screaming through the psychic link. The queen's voice became a whisper that cut through her mind. Destroy him and your people live. Refuse and the neural network binding the Zalar will collapse. Every mind will burn, yours included. Kayla froze, her thoughts fractured. Through the link, she could feel the suffering, the agony of her kind unraveling. The cries of her people clawed at her soul, demanding salvation. And yet, when she looked at Elias, she saw the quiet strength that had changed her forever. Elias spoke softly. Kayla, don't do this for me. Do what's right. What's right? Her voice broke. There's no right left, Elias. If I save them, I lose you. If I save you, I kill them. Then find another way, he whispered. You always do. The queen rose from her throne, her body trembling. For the first time, Kayla saw the sickness. The decay spreading through her veins like liquid night. You think you can love your way out of destiny? The queen hissed. Then prove it. Save both or watch both die. Kayla's mind raced. The neural crown pulsed above her mother's head, feeding the hive mind that bound every Zalar consciousness together. She could feel its rhythm, its raw, living code. And suddenly she understood. She turned to Elias, eyes shining with tears and something far greater. If I can merge the link, she whispered. If I join my consciousness with yours, human and Zalar thought, maybe I can stabilize it. Maybe I can bridge them. Elias's breath caught. Kayla, that could kill you. Or worse, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. It could make me both. The queen's voice thundered through the hall. You would defile our mind with human corruption? Kayla met her gaze. No, I will complete it. She ripped the neural circlet from her mother's crown. The queen screamed, the psychic backlash shattering glass and bone alike. Energy flared around Kayla, her veins glowing with blue-white fire as she pressed her forehead against Elias's. Do you trust me? She whispered. Always. And then the universe shifted. Kayla reached through the hive link, threading Elias's human consciousness into the Zalar network. It was chaos, billions of minds, screaming, resisting the alien warmth flooding into them. Elias gritted his teeth as her memories, her pain, her love, all of it, flowed into him. Together they became the bridge. Human empathy intertwined with alien logic, fusing into something neither species had ever known. The queen staggered, clutching her chest as the link bypassed her control. Kayla! Stop! You'll destroy yourself. Kayla's voice was calm now, distant, radiant. Maybe that's what it takes. Light erupted from her body, spreading across the hall, then across the world. Every Zalar mind felt it, the pulse of something new, something alive. The network stopped collapsing. The pain faded. Silence fell. And when the light dimmed, Kayla was gone. Elias fell to his knees, gasping, her hand slipping from his grasp like a dream dissolving. The queen lay slumped against the throne, tears streaking her face. She did it, she whispered. She bridged us. Elias rose, trembling, his voice breaking, at the cost of herself. The queen's dying eyes turned to him. Then perhaps, that's what makes you human. Outside, the stars flickered, one by one, across the galaxy, as both species awoke to a new shared consciousness. Humans and Zalar began to feel one another for the first time. The hatred faded. The war was over. But in the neural silence that followed, somewhere deep in the hive link, a familiar voice whispered through Elias's mind. I'm still here. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire wept. The world awoke in silence. For the first time in centuries, the skies above the Zalar capital were clear. The storms that had once raged endlessly across the planet had broken, leaving only calm light pouring through fractured spires and melted glass. In that quiet, a pulse echoed, slow, deep, steady. Not mechanical, not divine. Something living, something new. Elias opened his eyes to find himself lying on a field of white ash. Above him, the air shimmered with residual energy from the merged hive mind, a faint aurora that pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. The last thing he remembered was Kayla's hand slipping away in the explosion of light. The thought hit him like gravity returning. She was gone. He staggered to his feet, shouting her name into the silence. His voice was swallowed by the wind. Then something stirred at the edge of the ruins. A silhouette, kneeling amid the broken thrones, remains. Her hair was silver, her skin streaked with human warmth and alien bioluminescence. Her eyes, no longer fully Zalar nor human, opened with a soft, radiant glow. Kayla, he breathed. She turned, slowly, as though waking from a long dream. Elias. Her voice carried two tones, one human, one alien, harmonizing like a single heartbeat spoken aloud. She looked down at her hands, the veins within them glowing faintly gold. It worked. I can feel them, all of them, every Zalar mind, every heartbeat. And yet, she reached toward him. I can still feel you. He crossed the distance in seconds, wrapping his arms around her. Her body was warm, alive, trembling. Not a ghost, not a construct. Her pulse thudded against his chest, perfectly matched to his own. When he pulled back, tears burned his eyes. You did it, Kayla. You ended it. She shook her head, her expression both sad and serene. No, I changed it. The war didn't end in victory. It ended in understanding. We didn't win. We remembered. All around them, the world was waking. The Zalar who had once fought against humanity were now kneeling beside human medics, their eyes soft with shared memory. Soldiers who had once fired on each other now looked up in confusion, realizing they could feel one another's thoughts, their pain, their regret, their hope. The hive mind had become something new, a bridge instead of a weapon. From the shattered horizon, the sun began to rise. For the first time, its light touched both species equally, no longer filtered through the queen's psychic veil. Kayla gazed at it, her mother's last whisper fading from the back of her mind like the tide retreating from shore. She's gone, Kayla said quietly, but she's at peace. I can feel it. Elias took her hand, their fingers interlacing. And you, she smiled faintly. I'm everything. Human warmth, Zalar strength, and something beyond either. I am what we were meant to be. He brushed a strand of glowing hair from her face, studying her as though afraid she might disappear. You made them remember what it means to feel alive. Her gaze softened. No, Elias. You reminded me first. They stood there together as dawn spread over the rebuilt world. The wreckage of the Empire shimmered with new growth, bioluminescent flora blooming through cracks of steel, living proof that life refused to bow to extinction. Above them, fleets once forged for war now circled in peace, broadcasting a single signal across every channel. Two heartbeats, pulsing as one. Kayla leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. Do you hear it? The heartbeat. No, she said, smiling. The beginning. And as the light rose higher, bathing them in the glow of a world reborn. The pulse of two hearts, human and alien, echoed through every corner of the galaxy. Not as rulers, not as gods, but as proof that even in the coldest reaches of space, love could still teach creation how to live again. The war had ended, but the story of life, their story, had only just begun.